Hey there guys, how are you? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to my Christopher Nolan series. And I am super excited because today we're talking about one of my favorite movies of all time, Batman Begins. This is a movie that I tend to gravitate towards every time I feel like I need a pick-me-up movie. Like, whenever I need a movie to cheer me up, I usually tend to grab this Blu-ray off the shelf and put it in. And I'll explain why I do so in a little bit. But let's just get to the basics first. I think you guys know the drill of this movie by this point. It essentially shows us the origins of the Caped Crusader of Gotham City. Young Master Bruce Wayne leads a privileged life as the son of wealthy philanthropist parents, but his father and mother are murdered by a mugger at a young age, and Wayne eventually grows up and becomes Christian Bale, hell-bent on vengeance until he's encouraged by his childhood sweetheart Rachel Dawes, played here by Katie Holmes, to search for answers beyond his own personal vendettas. And young Master Bruce eventually finds discipline in the Far East under the tutelage of Henri Ducard, played by Liam Neeson, a member of the mysterious League of Shadows, and they guide him in the study of martial arts and the ways in which an ordinary man can hone his senses to an almost superhuman ability. After an extended absence from Gotham, Bruce Wayne returns, determined to bring peace and safety back to the city. And with the help of his faithful servant Alfred Pennyworth, played by Michael Caine, and Lucius Fox, played by Morgan Freeman, Wayne eventually develops a secret identity as Batman, a masked vigilante for justice. But when a shady psychiatrist, played by Cillian Murphy, joins forces with the criminal underworld, Bruce Wayne realizes that putting an end to their nefarious plans will be very difficult indeed. So, I'm sure you're all wondering why this film is one of my favorites of all time, and why I tend to use this as a cheer-me-up. Well, it's plain and simple. This movie is extremely inspiring. To say the least, the Batman live-action films have a pretty up-and-down, sketchy history, to say the least. The first two films with Michael Keaton at the helm as the Caped Crusader I felt were very, very fun. But the next two, Batman Forever and especially Batman and Robin, no. But honestly, I can tend to appreciate those movies for what they are. Because without Batman and Robin being as terrible as it was, with all of Mr. Freeze's terrible ice puns. What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age! But without all that crap, it's honestly kind of a good thing that the movie was as terrible as it was, Batman and Robin, because without that crap, Batman Begins would never have existed. I can kind of appreciate that movie a little bit more these days for being one of those so bad it's funny type of films, if that makes sense to you guys. But this franchise was definitely in safe hands when it was announced that Christopher Nolan was writing and directing this movie. And I feel like I don't need to go into any further detail about how beautiful this movie truly is. Christopher Nolan wrote and directed the shit out of this film. And I feel like you guys have heard all the praise at this point. I don't know if I can offer anything new. But I will say, there were tons of times on this rewatch recently where I could have sworn that there was more CGI in this film than there actually was. It's not that the movie is completely devoid of it. There is a good amount of CGI effects, especially during the climax, which is tons of fun on the monorail system. But after doing some research, I found out that Nolan wanted to mostly use practical stunts and practical action set pieces for this film. And man, did those parts pay off. These action set pieces truly blew me away. And these action sequences as well, just so, yes, those are the kind of fights that I want. This choreography is so clean. And it's not just the fight sequences that are just so beautiful, but the cinematography is just so crisp. This is especially the case in the first act when Bruce Wayne is training in the Far East. Beautiful, gorgeous, snowy scenery on location. I mean, guys, the introduction to the Batcave, the Batmobile being put to use for the first time, this is a mesmerizing looking picture that made Gotham feel not just more realistic, but more grounded to real life than it ever has before. Now, in looking for actors to portray both Bruce Wayne and Batman effectively, you definitely need to choose carefully. Christian Bale, I think, was the perfect choice for this. And he is not only damn magnificent in this movie, I really have a lot of respect for him for taking this part, mainly due to his dedication to the role. For those of you who aren't aware, Christian Bale's previous film before filming this was The Machinist. For those of you who have never seen The Machinist, the things that Christian Bale did to his body to get down to the scrawny... Oh man, it's just brutal, the stuff he does. He is the ultimate master of getting into the proper shape for roles in terms of the bulk and the weight and all that stuff. Christian Bale went from the machinist to Batman. Think about that for a second. And I feel like he really nails both Bruce Wayne and Batman to a T. As Bruce Wayne, he is the right amount of smug, arrogant, preppy, rich kid who definitely seems to be a little bit on edge. Definitely reminded me a lot of Patrick Bateman, except not a psychotic serial killer who just kills people for fun. Totally against Batman's moral code. Speaking of, as good as Bruce Wayne's performance is, you need to have just an equally effective Batman or the performance won't exactly work. Thankfully, Christian Bale is such a badass as Batman. His whole introduction scene in the Batsuit, you guys know the scene I'm talking about, where he beats up that group of gangsters as part of Falcone's group, and we eventually get the famous, "I'm Batman." So awesome. And I also really like this iteration of the Batsuit, actually. A lot of people thought it was too bulky. I thought it was fine. It looked super clean to me. But the thing I want to address about the Batsuit and the whole Batman persona, I think it's absolutely brilliant how Nolan weaves that into the story. It's that scene in the Batcave where Alfred is talking to Bruce about, you know what? I'm actually going to quote it for you guys. "Master Bruce, why bats? They terrify me, and I want these people to feel that same fear." I mean, perfect. So let's get to probably the most controversial topic about this iteration of Batman, and that's the voice that he uses when he's under the cowl. A lot of people tend to be really distracted whenever Christian Bale goes into that raspy, "I'm Batman" voice. They're mostly distracted by it because it's silly, and, well, yeah, it is kind of silly, I will admit. But here's the thing. I wasn't really distracted by it, and I think that part was actually very intentional. I love what Christian Bale does here. He has the physical mask to cover his physical presence, so he doesn't give that away. Yeah, unless your name is Rachel, Dawes, Alfred, or Lucius, he doesn't really want anybody to know that Batman is Bruce Wayne. So therefore, if he were to use his normal voice under the Batman cowl, it wouldn't really work. Character-wise, it would drop the whole facade. I think it's a brilliant choice, actually. I didn't mind it. Now, I mentioned Michael Caine earlier as Alfred with a pretty bad impression of him. Perfect casting as Alfred. Even though he's a frequent collaborator with Christopher Nolan himself, after this whole trilogy came about, I couldn't really see anybody else filling those shoes. Jeremy Irons did so in Batman v Superman, and I think he did so very well. But just the dynamic that Michael Caine shares with Christian Bale, it's just so great. It's so touching, it's so funny at certain points. All those bloody push-ups, and he can't even lift a bloody log. So great. Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes in her only appearance in the trilogy. I think she does a very nice job here. While admittedly I don't find Rachel the most interesting character of the bunch, I think Holmes does a very good job with the material she's given. She does come off very supportive in Bruce's times of plight, and I think she's definitely a very strong presence in the film when she appears. And I definitely bought the relationship that Bruce and Rachel have with one another. It's great chemistry. I want to talk about Gary Oldman as Lieutenant Gordon. In case you guys didn't know, Gary Oldman is actually one of my favorite actors working today. I love this guy in everything he does. I think his Oscar win for Darkest Hour was well-deserved a few years back. He was just starting to catch fire as Sirius Black in the Harry Potter series, and Batman Begins came out a year after Prisoner of Azkaban. And honestly, he is so good here. This is such an underrated performance for him. Now, his poise and the situations he finds himself in, for example, when he has to do an impromptu manning of the Batmobile during the very exciting climax, it's so great. I am convinced that this guy can do no wrong. He was great here. But what's a comic book movie without its villains? Do these guys even need an introduction? They're Batman villains. Batman Begins graces us with the presence of two of Batman's most familiar foes. First and foremost, we get the Scarecrow, played by Cillian Murphy. And I definitely thought he was the right kind of deranged for this part, and I really love this costume and this character design. Also, what they do with his voice is terrifying. It almost made me think it was something straight out of The Exorcist, which is terrifying in and of itself. I thought it was a great performance, even though I thought his dynamic with Batman was more on the traditional side of things. It's a great dynamic though, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like there were more interesting aspects to the movie aside from this little feud that was going on. But thankfully, Batman's feud with the other baddie that appears in this movie, I feel like is what really takes Batman Begins over the top. And it's the presence of Bruce Wayne's former teacher, Ra's al Ghul, played by Liam Neeson, phenomenally, by the way. Neeson is so damn good in this movie. even though his appearance is kind of bookended between the first and third acts, his range is so unbelievable. He goes from a sketch guy who Bruce thinks he can trust in his training to a completely unhinged warrior bent on mass destruction. Now, some people when rewatching Batman Begins may forget that Ra's al Ghul is in this movie because he kind of disappears during the second act. But honestly, that's the whole idea, because it kind of reveals that he's the puppet master in this whole situation. And this whole dynamic between Bale and Neeson in this movie, this whole entire feud, I loved it. This almost makes me think it's what would happen if, after Mr. Miyagi and the Karate Kid, after he finishes training Daniel-san, and Daniel-san rides off into the sunset and becomes this extremely powerful karate master, Mr. Miyagi suddenly comes out of the shadows and he starts to go Super Saiyan, taking over the whole world, and Daniel-san has to stop him. It's a weird analogy, but that's the thing. This is a student versus teacher dynamic, and we hadn't really seen that very much in superhero movies, especially leading up to 2005. I loved it so much. God, can you tell why this is one of my favorite movies? Now, one thing that I feel like people will tend to complain about is that all three acts in this movie feel like completely different movies in and of itself. The first act is like this samurai epic adventure. The second act becomes this big heist-ish crime thriller. And the third act turns into this gigantic comic book explosion of an extravaganza. But the thing is, even though all the acts feel like their own movies in and of itself, that's the thing. They all fit together so effortlessly to create one cohesive story. What else can I really say, guys? Batman Begins is an incredible cinematic achievement. It has absolutely everything you could ever want out of an origin story. And I would even go as far as to say that, yeah, this is the perennial origin story, i.e. the definition of what a superhero origin story should be in the cinema. And a lot of these new comic book movies that are coming out have Batman Begins to thank for that. Doctor Strange, especially in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I feel like takes a lot of influence from Batman Begins. But point being, this is such an influential piece of cinema that I feel like will stand the test of time for generations. Batman Begins is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it 150,000% deserves an A+. Well, guys, that's 2 Christopher Nolan reviews down. 2 perfect grades. Can we keep up the streak here? Feel free to tune into my channel at this point next week. Same time, coming up next is the second installment in this fantastic trilogy, The Dark Knight. I can't wait to talk about that one with you guys. But what do you guys think of Batman Begins? What is your favorite Christopher Nolan film? I'd like to know in the comments section down below. Thank you guys so much, as always, for tuning into the video. Be sure to give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, and go ahead and hit that subscribe button as hard as you possibly can on your way out. Seriously, you guys are the best. Thank you so much again. Look out for more reviews very soon. And with all that being said, Back Talk, commence.